Step into analysis, please.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we're talking about all of Westworld dating up to the current episode, which is Season 4, Episode 3. This video will attempt to make a few major connections that date back to Season 3 and even prior, and overall try to figure out where this story is heading by looking at where we've been. It's my dream that you will watch this video, you will hit that subscribe button, and then go flex on all of your friends about your new cool theories about where the show is going. But without further ado, let's overthink an HBO show about robots. Season 3 ends with Maeve and Caleb teaming up, Dolores Prime being deleted by Rehoboam being deleted by Caleb, the world sent into disarray, Halores wanting to kill humanity, William being captured by Halores to be used in her master plan, Bernard entering the Sublime to find another way to save humanity using a key that was placed in his mind by Dolores Prime much earlier. We should also note that Bernard was instructed by Dolores Prime through my favorite and still MIA DeLorean, Lawrence, to go and meet Arnold's wife and Charlie's mother, Lauren. Now, this meeting was a heartfelt goodbye and probably my favorite part of the Season 3 finale. On my 15th rewatch now, it makes me go, damn, like Jeffrey Wright can act. This whole scene, like this loss, this feeling, it gets you every time. But what's the purpose of the scene? Well, at the time, it was yet to be revealed for the overall drama of the finale, but we know that Dolores did this, physically sent him there to have this conversation because she had changed her mind about humanity as a species, noting that at some point she came to realize that she cared most about the beautiful moments in life, choosing to see that beauty after learning fully, after being exposed to everything that she could be, and still seeing how terrible humanity can be. She still decided that they're not hopeless, that there are still beautiful things. And I think that she wanted Bernard to realize that as well. Meeting Charlie's mom showed him just how beautiful and fragile humanity can be, that it's something worth protecting because we aren't all the 1% that are visiting the park to rape and pillage. In Dolores's final moments, one of the last memories that she moved to the back of her mind was a beautiful interaction between Maeve and her daughter. Bernard was sent to Lauren to show us that Dolores also acknowledges that humans can have those beautiful moments as well. And I think that is super important, that when we are fast forwarded to the point of, after the great human rebellion against Insight, we come to a point where Caleb is now also raising a child of his own. I believe that children and the general concept of child rearing or the education of each other, of humanity as like a broader concept, are pillars of this series. I believe that they highlight that children can be whatever they wish to be, and it largely relates to that environment or the deterministic variables that go into what makes a person a person. Frankie growing up in this environment, which from the outside looks largely positive, shapes many of the initial variables that will heavily position them on many aspects of their life later on. If every person that went to the park was, I don't know, maybe hugged more as a child, they probably wouldn't have felt the need to rape and pillage as a form of catharsis. I'm simplifying the complete picture for the purpose of deconstructing the conceptual story that I believe that Westworld is creating, but I think that is exactly why we skip 7 years ahead to Caleb with a child, and so much of the beauty that humanity has to offer in Westworld relates to the relationships between child and parent. Children are the most pure versions of humanity before the dogma of life gets established, and we look at everything around us through a lens of ignorance and a deep-rooted desire to simply learn about the world around us. Original sin doesn't exist. Humanity being evil is a taught conceptual thing. And I believe that Dolores Prime realized this, and that is ultimately why she changed her mind in Season 3. Thus, her desire to help Bernard also realized that this occurs in humanity, with Maeve already deciding in Season 1 that this was a beautiful part of existence in the hosts. Even if it was created, this is still a beautiful part of the host experience. Bernard and Maeve are our heroes. Caleb represents how humans can be good. Frankie represents children learning and how it is still a malleable mind that can go one way or the other, which is exactly why I believe that this is the adult version of Frankie, because it would give us such a great picture of how his influence as a father is still felt when she is an adult. Even if she doesn't realize it, we will be able to see those connections from afar, and thus the importance of being a good parent to your child is a way that we can be better humans. All of that is my very long-winded way and my HaxDogma brand rant about why the protagonists of this story care about humanity, and again, the importance of mental health in this increasingly pro-human story. Next, we need to consider Halores. If it wasn't obvious, I call her this because it is a combination of Hale and Dolores. By the end of season 3, she was exposed to the absolute worst of humanity, which would be the murder of children. Again, this concept of children being used to highlight the complicated existence of humanity, almost like children are the answer, in some metaphorical, very important kind of way, or maybe even just a literal way. Like children are literally the next generation, are literally our best chance to be better than the previous generation. Anyway, Halores here was privileged to all of Dolores's experiences, the good and the bad, and had every chance to become her own being after parting with Dolores Prime. Dolores Prime points out in season 3 that she knew that this would happen and tries to help her stay aligned with her original goals with, some intimate moments and attempts to reassure her. However, Halores was exposed to a completely new existence from that point on, seeing even more wickedness. She fell in love with this family, with this child, and made real steps to protect and nurture him. She protected him from pedophiles, which gave her additional insight into the worst that humanity has to offer. Also, being in charge of Delos probably gave her more insight into the worst that, was going on behind the scenes. And then finally, when Serac killed her family, she was broken, convinced that even the most beautiful parts of humanity were not worth it, because we are irredeemable monsters who resort to killing our own babies when it suits our convenience. Her villain arc was so subtly yet tragically created in season 3. Just as Dolores Prime showed that she could change her mind, Halores showed that she could as well. And with that, we have our protagonists and our antagonists for season 4. One team viewing the worst, another team viewing the best, and as of episode 3, we have a few things to note that I think, with everything considered, will show us exactly how these independent stories will be intertwined going forward. From this point, I'd like to highlight the timeline that we got from season 3 for the future events of the show. Now, this strategy was never uploaded to Rehoboam, as far as I can tell. It was destroyed, but I think it's interesting that we align on a few of these points, with the great rage against the machine happening directly after the Insight operation was revealed, and then Caleb now has a wife and daughter roughly 7 years from that point. We also know that the plot with the flies and the new park are all occurring on that timeline in that relative section, and we now know that the fly operation was relatively new because Halores literally says so. We know that Halores was on a warpath against humanity, and I believe that we can deduce that she is going to be largely successful in this campaign. I say this because I think that what we're seeing are the larger scale parts of the story, instead of a story that goes over the course of just a few weeks like we have seen in the past. The flies, and more specifically the people infected by the flies, are being controlled by the frequency generator, which was created by Hale. Maeve and Caleb leave their respective holes after God only knows what happened to them directly after the war started, and enter Hale's timeline, confirmed when we see them interacting in the aftermath of her creating the flies, testing them on this couple, and then luring Maeve and Caleb to the park. In the park, we see the frequency generator, which I now believe we can confirm is a prototype of the larger tower. This structure is positioned right in the middle of this tower. I believe that what we're seeing are the early versions of this grander design, which probably does not exist in Maeve and Caleb's timeline yet. Now, Maeve and Caleb are trapped. In terms of how they make it out of William's clutches, I honestly have no idea. And because of the scale of this season 4 story, I think that they might not. This is maybe just a side theory. Maeve could be dug up later, and Caleb could exist in a variety of different forms. So I'm not saying that they're out of the story completely, but this might be a moment where we learn that they never make it out of the lion's den. Regardless, the point is, in the earliest timeline, 7 years after the Great War, Hale is designing a human control system that works remotely. We know the tower at some point will come to exist, and it will become an instrument for Hale to enact her plot against humanity. Now, there could still be some big twist that she doesn't actually want to kill humanity and blah, 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 but I mean, I think that we have a very clear good versus evil plot with the larger cast of characters, and she really only has one role to play, and that is, of course, of the world domination Dami. Now, the only other character that we know has any relationship to the tower is Christina. She could exist in a dozen different ways. We know that she has some kind of influence from Dolores. We know, or it's my belief that again, we're still seeing some kind of like recreation or advancement from her, maybe even relating to her time with Rehoboam. But regardless, she could exist in a dozen different ways. But ever since episode 1, I have always looked for clear markers about where her timeline or when her timeline was taking place, and they never arrived. Right away, we learn when most of everybody else is except for her, and that has always been in the back of my mind. So that exact number really depends on the scope of this season. It could be 20 years, it could be 100 years, but I think her timeline is meant to show us the first-person perspective of this system that involves the flies and taking over people's minds. Like, this is the master Halores plan in action, and we are seeing the origin of it and it being executed. And I think that the only thing we need to really consider is the scene with the real William to determine more about her motivations. As far as we know, she absolutely does not need this character anymore, and she says outright that her motivation in keeping him alive is so that he can be the loser, so that he can suffer like she and the other hosts suffered. And this contraption that he's in could be a few things, but my guess is that it is a haptic suit that allows a person to feel something happening to their body while they are asleep. I think that she is torturing William in some kind of dream hellscape that he cannot escape because of what he was injected with. And this haptic suit will stimulate his body, feeling the damage that happens in this hellish dreamscape. Now, the best part of this theory is that I believe that we've already seen this. Hale learned about the pain of losing a child. She knows that this is the worst that humanity has to offer, and I think that this would be the hell that she would choose to create for anybody else. So what better thing to subject William to over and over and over and over again than his final trip to the park, where since season 1, he came to the park already wanting to kill himself because of the loss of his wife, and it ultimately ended with his defeat directly after he murders his only daughter, Emily. That would be the absolute perfect moment to make this man suffer, and the best part is, we already know that that is going to happen. If you're a fan of this channel and you've already hit that subscribe button, you will know what I'm about to show. If you are new here, I hope that this little tidbit was enough to convince you that we have the absolute best theories and you should join this community and contribute to the conversation by hitting that subscribe button today. Without further ado, the post-credit scene of season 2 will finally make sense in the grand scale of this series, of this story. This moment highlighted William in a loop going through the park over and over testing fidelity, but I don't think that this was an action of the good guys viewing him as a redeemable man trying to help him. I now believe that Emily saying that this was his fidelity test was just simply torture. She wasn't trying to open his eyes, but lean into the cruel irony of his actions to further break his spirit before setting him back into his own loop, fated to go through these steps once again, only to feel that loss over and over and over again. That's exactly why I think this is what is happening to William when he goes into that deep and dream-filled slumber. And I also think the fact that it appears like he is cryo-slept when she walks away points to maybe him coming back from this hellish, dreamscape in 20 plus years. Like, we're going to see him in that advanced timeline, and he probably won't look like he is another 20 years older because he was in this cryo sleep. Maybe he is still a redeemable man after all. So in relation to the grander Halores plot, we just have to decide if William was also a part of the testing of this new system. And that becomes a little harder. I can't really make any correlation between this system and the fly frequency system, which I don't think we need to explain further. Like, the fly thing feels pretty self-explanatory, right? It's taking control over humans and making them do whatever, their 7 steps, and ultimately it ends with the humans killing themselves. But There is a greater than zero chance that this testing is also a part of the system in some kind of way. It could, again, be early testing for the technology that she uses later on for her grand evil plot, but it could also just be a single torture machine designed for the person that caused her a great deal of trauma throughout her life. So it's not really clear. But we know that Hale is using the tower to take care of humanity, which is still loosely defined as her killing them. And the other key bit of information we learn from Hale and William's scene is that she will not bring children into this world until the humans have been taken care of, until the jackals have been taken care of, which I think helps define when we're seeing the plot with Christina take place. I think that we have enough evidence to prove that the building Christina works in is the tower. The birds laying dead highlight a potential radioactive microwave that is being emitted from the tower, the homeless man shouting about this song with no sound, the group of guys coming from her place of work or this bridge in general, discussing how wild their morning trip was, not believing that it was one of their first times, and the fact that she's writing NPC stories that correlate to human lives. This is 100% the tower. I mean, it could also be another thing. Like, they do like to throw in, at the last episode, they'll just throw in another technology that's existed this entire time. It could be that. I want to maybe drag them for that a little bit. But in my opinion, right now, this is 100% the tower. I believe Christina could be one of Hale's children, in a similar way that Dolores was the code in which all of the other sentient beings came into existence. All of the beings would now be created off of Halores here, and it also makes me think that maybe Dolores was killed because there can be only one real DeLorean kind of thing. I'm not too sure. I believe that Christina could be one of Hale's children and a new generation of host that we also kind of learned that Hale was working on when she is talking to Maeve about doing her upgrades. We know that there is, a linear progression happening with the the anatomy of hosts. So we know over many years, new iterations of hosts are being built. And I think that Christina is going to be one of those. Now, the only other bit of information we need to add back into this equation is that Hale said that she would not bring children into a world filled with jackals. So does that mean that the jackals are no longer the majority of the population of this planet, seeing as she is potentially bringing children into the world? Are we seeing a timeline where humanity is on the brink of extinction and the majority of these characters are hosts? Could that be the reason that everyone appears to wear black or white around the world, and why these three characters leaving her place of work were discussing how wild the game was? Even the company being called Olympiad may be symbolically positioning the hosts as the gods over humanity, because the tower itself is the gaming company, I believe, that somehow correlates to real life events. What if Dolores is writing the NPC characters, or what we know as just the remaining humans? She is literally Lee Sizemore, and the humans will then live out the rest of their existence like they were hosts in the park, unknowingly going through the actions, except for the few outliers that realize that they are being controlled in some kind of way still. But instead of, it being just a single park, the entirety of the world is the host's new park. Hosts are maybe born back into this world with the help of Hale and her operation, and maybe given loose stories and cornerstones that will then allow them to become whoever they wish to be in the wild. Although there is a very arguable point if they don't know that they're hosts. I think it's kind of arguable to say that, I don't know, it'd be interesting if the hosts didn't know that they were hosts, and that was Hale's ultimate goal, is to maybe make sure this next generation did not know that they were different than everybody else around them, which I think is a grand idea. But at the same time, I feel like I would want to know about my own existence to the maximum amount that I could possibly know about my existence. But honestly, if the hosts can't tell the difference, does it really matter? And I think that line will 100% be used to explain that exact thing. There are still many parts that I won't even pretend to understand, such as exactly how she is influencing human lives, aside from the high-level connection of the tower and the flies that control humanity. And I won't pretend to know why the timeline appears to be kind of funny, nor why every other shot of Christina involves a mirror of some kind. I do have theories about about both of those on my other videos, but in terms of this one, I can't really fit that in. So if you have additional thoughts about those exact points, or want to note that maybe my overall theory could be wrong because of those unknown variables, hey, please do. I want to be truthful about this. These are those tricky puzzle pieces that I just can't seem to find a fit for. And I'd like you to contribute and, become the community and theorycraft about the show. Regardless of however the good guys plan to stop this with that single timeline that does not end with the end of human civilization, I think this will be the poetic villain arc of Hale, and I think we will see much of this confirmed this season, or maybe none of it confirmed. Either way, I'm glad that y'all are here. Again, I think that we are seeing a linear timeline played out over many, many years, providing perspectives that will show us how insidious Hale's plot actually is, with Christina's first-person perspective. But with that, we come to the end of the video. Special shout out to my top tier patrons over on Patreon, Michael Link, the replacement host that will one day usurp Halores. Special shout out also to everyone that has newly subscribed in these last 3 weeks. We are now closer to our goal of 50,000 before the end of season 4, and I appreciate you all greatly for that. Much love, everybody, and I cannot wait to talk to you all again soon.